After a mom was diagnosed with terminal cancer, she left an emotional final message for her kids. But before we start, please give the video a like and make sure to subscribe to WonderBot and hit the bell so you'll never miss any uploads from us. After Caroline Wright was diagnosed with terminal cancer at the age of 32, it felt like her world might soon fall apart. Doctors told her she could only have 1 year left with her young family. So Wright began the heartbreaking process of writing down what she wanted her kids to know before she passed away. Prior to the winter of 2017, Wright's life was a self-confessed dream come true. She'd met her husband Garth in college in Paris at the age of 19. He was her first true love, and they'd go on to welcome 2 sons together, named Henry and Theodore. The family lived in Seattle, Washington, where Wright wrote cookbooks. However, Wright's world was soon to be rocked by a devastating diagnosis. In February 2017, she'd been writing her 3rd cookbook when a routine MRI scan found a large tumor in her frontal lobe. A week later, Wright had surgery to remove the mass, and it was then that doctors discovered the truth. Wright was told that she had glioblastoma, the most aggressive form of cancer which starts out in the brain. While the disease can be treated with surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation, it tends to return. As a result, the long-term prognosis for the condition is not positive. Furthermore, less than 3 to 5% of people with it live longer than 5 years. Wright recalled the moment she discovered the news in a self-penned piece for People magazine in August 2019. And it seems that there had been no sugarcoating when it came to addressing the cook's prognosis. Wright revealed how her surgeon had told her, the median survival rate for glioblastoma is 12 to 15 months. Of course, the news came as a devastating shock to Wright, as well as her husband and mom, who had accompanied her to her appointment. She then revealed their reaction in her surgeon's office. Wright said, his previously friendly nurse practitioner, who had joked with me about post-op hairstyles, leaned against the wall in the corner, facing away from us as we all began to cry. Given Wright's diagnosis, she was forced to consider that she might only have 12 months left with her beloved family. However, that prognosis was hard for the young mom to accept. After all, she'd been in relatively good health up until that point and believed that she'd had her whole life ahead of her. Writing for People, Wright explained, I was 32 and living my dream. I'd married the first love of my life, whom I'd met during college in Paris. We had 2 wild boys together. I wrote books from our yellow cottage on a hill in Seattle in my dream job as a cook, writer, and cookbook author. I had so many plans, so much to look forward to. Prior to her cancer diagnosis, Wright had felt somewhat reassured about her health in general. However, after learning she had glioblastoma, she realized that there was nothing protecting her from the deadly illness she knew affected others. Wright said, I wasn't special or entitled to health the way I'd unknowingly been for my then 32 years. It was terrifying. At the time of her diagnosis, Wright's boys were just 6 and 3. As she drove home from the hospital, she considered how she'd break the tragic news to her young sons. She wanted them to understand as much as possible about her illness. Without shattering the safe bubble she'd tried to create for their childhood. In her piece for People, Wright explained, ever since their births, I keenly understood that being mom to them was to make them feel safe and secure, to give them fertile ground from which to grow. However, her cancer diagnosis threatened to destroy the security Wright had worked so hard to achieve. So while Wright's days were now consumed with a whirlwind of pills, appointments, and blood tests, she tried to maintain some kind of normalcy for her children. She put her family's needs above all else, continuing to cook for them as she'd always done. However, her culinary efforts were now purely for sustenance rather than the basis of any future recipe books. Concerned about her future, Wright knew that her #1 priority was her sons. So while she opted for a number of lifestyle changes that would be kinder on her body, she channeled much of her attention to her boys. She told Working Mother, the only thing that grew in intensity was my explosive, all-consuming love for my sons. So despite the devastating blow that Wright had been dealt, she was determined to stay true to herself for the sake of her sons. That meant putting on a brave face and attempting to live life to the full. After all, it was important for Wright to create precious memories with her family while she still had the chance. Writing for Working Mother, Wright explained her thinking. She said, "It was clear to me that if, indeed, my prognosis was accurate and I only had a year left to live, I was going to spend it the way I had every other year of my life, as an optimist and vibrant artist who searches for beauty in unexpected places. That's the mother I wanted my boys to remember, if even they could." In order to help Wright continue to express herself, she'd started a blog following the discovery of her tumor. At first, Wright simply kept her family and friends updated on the goings-on of her cancer. However, her writing later evolved to become much more emotional than she had originally intended. Wright told Working Mother, "I wrote for my sons. I imagine questions their future selves might one day want to know about the limits in the slices of truth we freely gave them as little boys. Writing was a familiar space for me, and one I was deeply grateful to still find home in, considering I'd been warned my surgery could have altered my capability and motor skills." Through her writing, Wright managed to find some escape from her illness. It brought her closer to her sons as she imagined the future conversations that she may never get the chance to have with them. Wright told People, "I wrote, finding solace in a space where my words spilled out onto vast expanses of imagination and possibility." But while it was the imagined question of her sons that kept Wright occupied on her blog, it was their real-life queries that gave the mom her biggest epiphany. In her article for People, Wright recalled how her son Henry had asked her, "Who will take care of me if you die?" The heartbreaking inquiry may have seemed unanswerable at first, but Wright knew exactly what to say. With that in mind, Wright told her son, "The same people if I live." She was referring to the many people who filled her family's life, the relatives and friends who cared for them, whether Wright lived or died. She explained, "Your life will be filled with love, mine and others, whether it comes from my body or not." It was down to this interaction with Wright's son that she came to realize how powerful love really could be. She told People, "It was from this conversation that I began to imagine love as a tangible, inextinguishable force. After all, I knew that energy cannot be created nor destroyed, and I was living it." Feeling inspired, Wright used this realization as the basis for her next project. She wanted to write a book for her boys that summed up her philosophy that love didn't die or diminish, even after a person's passed. So, working with her illustrator friend Willow Heath, Wright got to work. Wright revealed to Working Mother why she felt this kind of project was the most appropriate. She wrote, "None of the children's books I found regarding death had spoken to the clear and open philosophy we'd cultivated in our house. We were naming death outright and talking about it, not just without fear, but with love. I wanted to write about it, but didn't know how." But it didn't take long for Wright to find her voice. One morning she awoke and knew instinctively what she wanted to say. Spurred on by the excitement of producing something that would provide her kids and others with some hope, she finally embarked on what would become her most emotional book project to date. Even though Wright had to squeeze in writing between her cancer treatment, the process of creating the book enabled her to escape her illness somewhat. The project gave her something positive to focus on, and it was her wish to leave a hopeful legacy for her sons, even if she couldn't be there for their futures. Wright then revealed to Working Mother how the project took her away from her cancer battle. She said, "When I was working on the book, I would almost forget that I was the dying mother in the story." However, while writing helped Wright to feel herself, she found that her approach to work had changed significantly. In her article for Working Mother, Wright explained, "I realized that I was still working hard like I would have before my diagnosis, but I didn't let myself get worn out. Working until I was worn out is something I would have done before, but I now know that no project is worth risking the delicate balance of my health." Wright completed her book, Lasting Love, in August 2019, and some of the first people to get their little hands on a copy were the author's two sons, Henry and Theodore. However, revealing her work to her children was much more emotional than the author had originally anticipated. Wright explained to People, "A few months ago, I tried to read an advanced copy of it to Henry, who would now read it to himself if he chose, but it was something like torture for both of us. Not quite the picture I had in my mind. For us, the story's too real. I read it only once, and we cried silently through it." However, Wright had a reassuring revelation for her little son. She explained, "I said to him as I closed the book, 'You know this is only a story right now, right? And not our story.' And then I just hugged him and told him that I'd always love him, like I had so many times before. After that, the cook went to fix dinner for her family, and once again she was struck by a poignant thought. Wright explained, "It occurred to me the most beautiful part of the book remains unwritten. What this book will mean to the future version of ourselves, the symbol it's created for us and other families like ours. The thought of a grown Henry and a wrinkled version of me, crying over it again with gratitude, is the most comforting thought of all." Furthermore, despite her terminal illness, Wright had already found something to be grateful for. Because by the time her book was finished, it had been more than 2 years since she'd received her cancer diagnosis. And somehow she defied all odds to still be with her family. And that was something the author could be happy about. Wright wrote in People, "Now midway through my 2nd year that surprised my doctors with success, my scans remain clean and the word miracle has slipped out of my doctor's mouth more than once. Hope abounds. Though I remain as focused as I was during treatment, I take nothing for granted." Moreover, now that she's 2 years down the line, Wright can look back on her cancer diagnosis in a different light. She explained to Working Mother, "The thing about being given a year to live is that at once, nothing and everything matters. For me, my life became really simple, yet really concentrated." And now, Wright hopes she can inspire other people with her positive attitude.